Millstone was the kind of Ohio River town people drove through without even noticing. It had one diner, one gas station, and one steel bridge, built back in 1956, that connected the town to the highway across the river. That bridge, it was everything. It carried school buses, emergency vehicles, and supply trucks. Every single paycheck that entered Millstone crossed that steel spine. Tom Alvarez had been inspecting that bridge for 15 years. He wasn't a dramatic guy. He wasn't political. He definitely wasn't the kind of man who liked attention. But tonight, standing under the massive iron beams with a flashlight in his hand, he felt something cold and sharp twist in his stomach. A crack. Not just a surface crack, either. This was a deep fracture, running right along a primary support joint. Tom crouched lower, brushing away flakes of rust with his glove. He saw water damage and heavy corrosion, but there was something worse: structural separation. The metal was literally pulling apart. He stood up slowly, his gaze drifting to the dark, churning river below. If this joint failed, the entire central span of the bridge could drop. Just like that. The very next morning, Tom found himself sitting across from Mayor Ellen Brooks in her office. "We need to close the bridge immediately," Tom said, his voice firm as he slid a series of stark photos across her desk. The mayor frowned, picking one up. "Close it? For how long?" "Until it's properly reinforced," Tom answered. "Months, maybe?" Her expression hardened instantly. "Tom, you know what will happen if we close that bridge. This town dies. Our businesses rely on that traffic." Tom didn't blink. He held her gaze. "If we don't close it, people could die." The mayor leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking in the silent room. "We'll restrict heavy trucks," she decided. "We'll add more warning signs. But a full closure. Tom, it's just not happening." Tom left her office with a heavy weight in his chest, a feeling of dread that settled deep in his gut. That evening at home, his wife Rachel could see it written all over his face as he pushed food around his plate. "What happened?" she asked gently. "They won't shut it down," he said, the words barely a whisper. Rachel set down her fork. Is it really that bad?" Tom hesitated for a long moment, then looked her straight in the eye. "Yes." The following week, new signs went up at the bridge entrance, weight limit strictly enforced. But the flow of traffic barely changed. It seemed people ignored signs when the inconvenience felt bigger than the danger. So, Tom returned to the bridge, night after night, armed with his measuring equipment. The crack had widened, not by much, but it was enough. It was undeniable. He took more photos, meticulously documented every millimeter of growth, and sent a formal, detailed risk assessment directly to the State Infrastructure Board. He had to go over the mayor's head. 2 days later, he was summoned to City Hall again. This time, Mayor Brooks wasn't calm. Her voice was sharp. "You went over my head?" "I followed protocol," Tom replied, his own voice steady. "You're causing a panic, Tom." "No," he said quietly. "The bridge is." The next morning, the headline of the local news read, "Bridge inspector overstates risk, officials say." Just like that, his credibility was being dismantled in public. When he walked into the diner for coffee, conversations stopped. People turned away. He overheard one truck driver mutter to another, "He's just trying to shut down our livelihoods." Tom felt completely, utterly isolated. A man screaming a warning that nobody wanted to hear. But every single night, he returned to the bridge, and every single night, the fracture grew. Then came the storm warning. Heavy rain, a flash flood advisory. High winds were expected by midnight. Rachel stood by the living room window, watching the lightning flash across the darkening sky as thunder rolled in the distance. "Tom, please tell me that bridge can handle this storm." Tom didn't answer. He couldn't. Because deep down, in the part of him that knew steel and stress and failure points, he knew the truth. It couldn't. At 11:47 p.m., a brilliant fork of lightning split the sky, illuminating the whole town for a split second. Tom was already in his truck, racing toward the river. He had to see it. He needed to know. Rain pounded against the windshield, the wipers fighting a losing battle as he reached the bridge entrance. The river below was a raging torrent, rising fast. He jumped out of the truck, the wind and rain hitting him like a physical blow. The steel of the bridge groaned under the strain. It wasn't loud, but it was a sound of metal in agony. Tom aimed his powerful flashlight at the central support beam he'd been watching for weeks. The crack had spread 3 more inches. It was tearing itself apart. Just then, a distant rumble echoed from behind him. Headlights cut through the storm at the far end of the bridge. A vehicle was coming, a big one. It was a full-size passenger bus, and it was entering the bridge. In a sickening flash of realization, Tom knew exactly which bus it was. It was the late-night charter, bringing the high school band home from the regional competition. Kids from his own town were on that bus, and they were driving straight into a death trap. He had to do something. He had to stop them. The bus rolled forward slowly, its tires spraying water across the gleaming steel surface of the bridge. Through the sheets of rain, Tom sprinted, waving both arms frantically. "Stop! Stop!" he yelled, but the storm swallowed his voice whole. The bus driver hesitated, his face a mask of confusion. Just then, the entire bridge shuddered. A deep, metallic snap echoed through the chaos, a sound Tom felt in the soles of his boots. The support joint had shifted. He knew it. He finally reached the driver's window, pounding his fist against the glass. "Back up. Now." The driver stared, and for a split second, something in Tom's wide, terrified eyes cut through the noise and the rain. He didn't ask questions. He threw the bus into reverse. The vehicle lurched backward, inching away from the center of the span. But it was too slow. Agonizingly slow. Another violent crack ripped through the structure, louder this time. The center of the bridge dipped just a few inches, barely noticeable, but it was enough. It was the confirmation of Tom's worst fear. Below, the river raged, slamming debris against the bridge's lower beams like a battering ram. "Move!" Tom screamed, his voice raw. Inside the bus, teenagers, their faces pale with fear, clutched their seats. The driver stomped on the accelerator. The bus reversed faster. 20 feet, 15, 10. The bridge groaned, a long, mournful sound, like a dying beast. And then it happened. The central support joint split wide open. With a thunderous explosion of steel and spray, the middle section of the bridge collapsed into the churning river below. A massive wave shot upward, rocking the bus so violently that it nearly tipped, but it held. The driver slammed on the brakes, the bus now safely on the approach ramp. For a moment, there was silence. A profound, ringing silence, broken only by the steady drumming of the rain. Then, the silence was shattered by the sound of students crying, a mix of terror and relief. Tom, his legs giving out, fell to his knees on the wet pavement. He wasn't shaking from the cold or the storm. He was shaking from the sheer horror of what almost happened. Within minutes, the night was alive with the flashing red and blue lights of emergency vehicles. The beams danced across the twisted, mangled steel, sinking slowly into the dark river. The mayor arrived soon after, her face grim as she stared at the gaping hole where the bridge used to be. She turned to Tom, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. "You were right." Tom didn't answer. He couldn't. Because being right didn't feel like a victory. It felt like standing on the edge of a tragedy that had been averted by mere seconds. By morning, the small town of Millstone was swarming with national news crews. The headlines were stark: "Bridge collapse narrowly avoids mass casualty." On every channel, experts confirmed what Tom had warned about for weeks. The bridge's total structural failure was not just possible, but imminent. The mayor held a press conference, the cameras flashing in her face. "The bridge," she announced, her voice strained but firm, "will be fully rebuilt." A reporter from the back shouted a question that hung heavy in the air. Why wasn't it closed earlier? The mayor paused, the weight of that question settling on her. She looked down, then back at the cameras, and said quietly, "We underestimated the risk." Tom stood in the background of the crowd, a forgotten figure in a soaked jacket. He just wanted to disappear. Later, his friend Rachel found him near the riverbank, staring at the wreckage. "You saved them, Tom," she said softly. He kept his eyes on the water, where mangled steel beams poked out like the bones of a skeleton. "I almost didn't," he replied, the words catching in his throat. That night, the town gathered in the high school gym. It wasn't a celebration, but a collective exhale. Parents hugged their kids tighter than usual. The school's band director, whose students had been on that bus, stood at the podium, his hands trembling. "We all owe Mr. Alvarez our deepest gratitude." The crowd turned, their applause echoing in the cavernous gym. But Tom didn't feel heroic. He just felt exhausted. The what-ifs haunted him. What if he hadn't driven out into the storm? What if he had just trusted the city's official reassurances? What if his fear of being called a crank, of risking his reputation, had stopped him? The next morning, the official investigation delivered its verdict. The collapse was preventable with an earlier closure. Millstone had a choice to make. They could descend into a cycle of blame, pointing fingers and shouting accusations, or they could choose accountability. The mayor called another town meeting. This time, Tom sat in the front row. The air in the room was thick with tension. The mayor stepped to the podium, took a deep breath, and said something no one expected. "I should have listened." The room fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. She continued, her voice clear and steady. "We chose convenience over caution. We prioritized budgets and timelines over warnings. And we were wrong." In that moment, Tom felt something shift in the room. It wasn't anger. It wasn't denial. It was something else. It was the quiet, humbling weight of responsibility being accepted. The physical bridge was gone, a twisted wreck at the bottom of the river. But as the town listened to their leader's honest admission, something else was being rebuilt right there in that room. Trust. And maybe, just maybe, that was the more important structure to save all along. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking and subscribing for more content that explores the moments that define us. Weeks dragged on. Traffic snaked 30 long miles around the river. Local businesses felt the pinch, and commuters' complaints echoed through town hall. But a quiet understanding had settled over Millstone. No one argued about safety anymore. Temporary ferries, a slow but steady solution, began to shuttle people and cars across the water. Meanwhile, state engineers were hard at work, their pencils and computers sketching out the future, a modern, reinforced replacement bridge. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Tom stood at the riverbank. Mayor Brooks was beside him, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. "I should have trusted your judgment," she finally said, her voice soft. Tom gave a slow, deliberate nod. "It wasn't about me," he replied. "It was about the data." The mayor managed a faint smile, a hint of her usual resolve returning. "Next time," she promised, "I'll listen to the data." As winter's chill gave way to the warmth of early spring, construction began. The town became a collective spectator. Every day, people would gather to watch as massive steel beams were hoisted into the air, puzzle pieces of a stronger future. The students, the very same ones who had been on that bus, painted a huge banner. It hung proudly across Main Street, its message a bold declaration, stronger than before. The day the new bridge finally opened was not one for flashy fanfare. It was a day of quiet triumph. The new structure wasn't designed to be beautiful. It was designed to be solid, engineered with the latest safety standards, with reinforced joints and a foundation sunk deep into the earth. It was a testament to lessons learned. The high school band, with the same students who had felt the old bridge tremble beneath them, led the reopening ceremony. Their music was more than just notes. It was a celebration of survival, of a second chance. Tom stood quietly at the back of the crowd, away from the spotlight. He didn't need the recognition. Seeing the bridge standing firm was enough. Mayor Brooks stepped up to the microphone, her voice clear and strong, carrying over the gathered crowd. "Millstone learned something the hard way," she began. "We learned that infrastructure isn't just steel and bolts. It's trust. And building trust requires courage." Her eyes scanned the crowd and found Tom. "And sometimes," she added, her voice filled with a newfound respect, "courage looks like one person standing alone in a storm, telling a truth no one wants to hear." The crowd erupted in applause. A wave of gratitude and understanding washing over the town square. But Tom didn't soak it in. He simply turned to Rachel, his wife, and squeezed her hand. That was all the acknowledgement he needed. Later that evening, as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the river, Tom drove across the new bridge for the first time. He rolled down the window, letting the cool evening air rush in. He listened. There was no groan, no shudder, The structure held firm beneath the weight of his car, a silent, steady hum replacing the old bridge's tired creaks. In the passenger seat, his 10-year-old son, Liam, looked out at the dark, shimmering water. "Dad?" Liam asked, his voice small but clear. "Were you scared that night?" Tom's mind flashed back. The image of collapsing steel against the stormy sky. The terrifying glare of headlights plunging into darkness. The 40 seconds that had stretched into an eternity, changing everything. "Yes," he said, his voice honest and unwavering. "I was terrified." Liam looked at him, his young eyes searching for an answer. "Then why didn't you give up when no one listened to you?" Tom kept his gaze fixed on the road ahead, on the lights of Millstone twinkling in the distance. "Because sometimes," he said, "the job isn't to be popular, it's to be right." The tires hummed steadily against the smooth new pavement. Behind them, the town's lights reflected safely on the river's surface. The old bridge had fallen, but the town had not. And Tom knew, in that quiet, peaceful moment, what truly holds a community together. It isn't the steel or the concrete, it's the people. The people willing to stand their ground, to speak the truth, to do what's right, especially when it matters most. Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more content that makes you think. See you in the next one.